All right, welcome to another episode of Broken English Straight Facts. So, as you can see from the screen, we are turning our attention to what's been going on in South Africa. There's been a rising wave of xenophobic attacks on non-South Africans, or what we call migrants, right? Reason why this has caught my attention is because most of the migrants in South Africa are from fellow African countries. So that's kind of what piqued my interest. And I'm trying to figure out, where does all of this anti-migrant xenophobia come from, you know? So let's get down to the meat of it. I'm looking at a few articles. One is by Al Jazeera, another is by The Star, another is by a human rights research center. So let's get started with Al Jazeera.
Why are Nigeria-South Africa tensions rising amid xenophobic attacks? It's not the first time the two African giants have gone head-to-head over attacks on their nationals.
Right, so this is just trying to go back to earlier in the year when all these anti-migrant protests started, to be able to get a background on what's the reason behind the developments that we are currently seeing. Okay.
Nigeria has threatened retaliatory measures against South Africa after Abuja began repatriating hundreds of Nigerians from South Africa this week amid alleged xenophobic attacks by South African protesters. Diplomatic tensions between the two countries have spiked since the latest wave of violent anti-immigration protests by thousands of South Africans calling for strict, mass deportation measures.
All right, so it seems to have just ramped up earlier in the year. So what is kind of bringing or drawing international attention to the issue is the fact that Nigeria is speaking out against South Africa. So you've got two African economic giants getting into it over how South Africans are treating Nigerian migrants, and the sense that the Nigerian government feels the urgency to repatriate their citizens, right? It's not a good look. So I can definitely see why there's diplomatic tensions arising between the two.
South Africa has long attracted migrants from across the continent, entering the country both legally and illegally. Statistics South Africa put the number of foreign nationals at 2.4 million in 2022, about 3.7% of the total population of 65 million.
So 4% of the total population is made up of foreign nationals, right? Okay, let's see what 96% of South African nationals have against the 4% of migrants.
However, many South Africans claim that high numbers of undocumented migrants contribute to unemployment and place pressure on public services.
That's the real issue here. It's resources, economic opportunities. 96% of South Africans feel as though the reason why they don't have jobs, why they don't have access to opportunities, is because of 4% of foreign nationals residing in South Africa. I don't know if that math makes sense to you, but I can straight away say that the math isn't mathing. But let's carry on.
Have been three waves of anti-immigration protests since 2008, all turning violent and resulting in casualties and the looting of shops and other property. Much of the anger has targeted, in particular, nationals from Zimbabwe, Mozambique and Malawi, as well as Nigeria and Ghana.
It seems that 2008 was the tipping point. So it will be interesting to know what exactly transpired over the first decade of the 2000s to bring South Africans to the point where they're turning on immigrants or non-South Africans. Yeah. So I think the clue lies there. And it says that much of the anger is targeted specifically to nationals from Zimbabwe, Mozambique, and Malawi. So as you can see, it's Black South Africans against fellow Black Africans from the continent. And I don't know what that says about South Africans in as far as their attitudes towards fellow Black people, you know? It's a little strange to be seeing this happening, but let's carry on.
Here's what we know about the tensions and Nigeria's plans to take retaliatory steps. Why is Nigeria's government angry? On Monday, Nigerian Foreign Minister Bianca Odumegwu-Ojukwu accused South Africa's government of failing to forcefully denounce violence against Nigerian nationals in South Africa. She said this had damaged the bond the two countries have enjoyed since the solidarity Nigeria showed during South Africa's fight against apartheid.
All right. I did say that it looks a little off that Black South Africans are turning against fellow Black Africans residing or working in their country. Yeah. Now, an even better argument is being made here by the Nigerian foreign minister. And she's saying that South Africa owes the rest of Africa a debt of gratitude because they stood with South Africa while it was still under the apartheid regime. Nigeria, for one, and even Ghana, I remember, would be camping outside British consuls or embassies in their countries, demanding the independence of South Africa. So there was a lot of solidarity that was going on across the African continent in support of South Africa's fight against apartheid. So for South Africa, which is literally the youngest republic in Africa, right, in the second decade of their independence, to be turning against fellow Africans, especially targeting African countries that played a crucial part supporting their fight against the apartheid British regime. I don't know. It just looks like ingratitude on the part of South Africans. I think that's a really strong argument to make here. Yeah.
At least 2 Nigerian men died in April during the latest wave of violence. One of the men, Omar Miro Emmanuel, was killed after being beaten by officers from the South African National Defence Force, SANDF, on April 20, according to a statement by the Nigerian Consul General, Ninikanwa Okiuche. The other, Ekpenyang Andrew, was arrested in Pretoria before being found dead at a mortuary.
Now, we've got instances where it's not just anti-migrant sentiments, but it's the sentiments turning into actual violence, and the violence sometimes even resulting in casualties. So this is something on the level of Nazi Germany and the Jews, you know? So what's striking me the most about it is that you've got Black people doing this to fellow Black people. So it just kind of throws me off, you know? And even as the early argument was being made, African countries have been they've been through so much together in the last century when dealing with colonialism and fighting for their independence. They've got so much more in common than they have differences, you know? So to be seeing one of Africa's youngest republics behaving in the way that it is, even to the point that we are counting casualties. I'm not sure if they gave the number. They haven't stated the numbers yet, but the fact that we're having casualties and that some of them are with the approval of the local police enforcement just looking on perhaps with approval or indifference. I mean, that's a little alarming, you know? It doesn't bode well for South Africans.
Odumegwu-Ojukwu said Nigerians are being harassed in South Africa despite having legal status, countering claims by South African citizen groups that attacks have targeted only undocumented residents.
I've wondered myself, how does a mob have the means to tell the difference between legal and illegal migrants? I understand the rhetoric that they are anti-illegal immigration, but I think that is only something that they can say in theory, but they cannot distinguish between a legal and an illegal migrant when they're rushing foreigners in the street, when they're targeting businesses and looting stores. I don't think there's any mechanism for a mob to tell who's legal or not. They're simply going with ethnic features, perhaps even an accent. So it's pretty much very tribalist. It's only just a step short of racism, because you're literally looking at someone and identifying them for their distinct ethnic features and then targeting them specifically or scapegoating them for whatever the underlying economic issues are in a country. So as a immigrant in South Africa, what you're feeling is as though you have no protections under the law. So this is a clear indicator that we're looking at a South Africa that is functioning almost uh, as a failed state. The rule of law means nothing in South Africa. Human rights considerations all thrown out the window once the state has ceded to the mob, and law enforcement is pretty much indifferent to the violence that's ongoing against migrants, right? So this is embarrassing to say the least. And I wasn't even going to this article with the expectation that this is what I was going to find out. But what's going on in South Africa right now, it's just inexcusable across the board. They might have the right rhetoric with which to express their anger, frustration, and sentiments, but the actions that follow, their convictions, are just proof that underneath, this is just plain hate. The violence is driven by something really close to racism. It's Nazi Germany scapegoating the Jews all over again. And you have the South African government just looking on, law enforcement being indifferent. And I guess the only way South Africa can change their attitudes towards foreigners or change the manner in which they express their frustrations, whether with the government, with the political situation in the country, is if international pressure is applied to the country. Because right now, what we're looking at is the characteristics of a failed state. The rule of law has collapsed. The government is placating the mob, and law enforcement is indifferent to the violence and the crime and the killings being committed by the protesters on migrants. And it goes beyond structure. I think the issue is cultural. This is why the president, the government, law enforcement is almost in lockstep with the protesters. It's just a question of to what degree are they? But overall, their response, their press addresses very much close to the rhetoric that's coming out of the protesters. And that's really proof of a country and a culture that is conceding to the worst elements within it.
Businesses are being looted while children are forced to stay away from school, she said. The police refuse to do anything, the minister added. Nigeria is not happy because Nigeria has sacrificed much for the South African independence struggle, Odumegwu Ojukwu told journalists on Monday. My own generation, we carried placards, we demonstrated in front of South African assets, sometimes we even got arrested. At least 1,000 Nigerians were initially scheduled for repatriation this week, but Abuja says the number of people wishing to return home is rising.
That's a situation. You've got legitimate businesses being looted. The police refuse to do anything. You've got kids being denied access to schools. I mean, so it doesn't matter whether you're a legitimate business owner. It doesn't matter. You're just a kid trying to make it to school. So the rule of law has just collapsed. And the police they're indifferent to the crime. They're indifferent to the violence against migrants. They're just washing their hands off it. And that's crazy to me. So if you listen to what the Nigerian, I forget what her title is. Is it maybe the Minister of Foreign Affairs, possibly? So whoever she is, she's saying that her generation was demonstrating in front of South African assets in their countries to support South Africa in their fight against the apartheid regime. So for them to be having now to repatriate their own nationals from South Africa because of the way South Africans are treating their people. I mean, that arc, it just looks like a lot of ingratitude, if you ask me. So that gives you an idea of all the moving pieces of what's going on in South Africa as far as the migrant issue is concerned.
Thank you for watching this episode of Broken English Straight Facts.